Katie and J.R. Berger from Chicago, Illinois, representing the Midwest region. Anti-Semitism is surging once again, and all of us should be alarmed by this trend. Holocaust history shows that targeting one group can lead to an increase in racism, extremism, and hatred of others throughout society.
At this critical moment, it has never been more urgent for our generation to support the museum's educational work and engage in conversations like we're having this evening. We're proud to serve as co-chairs for this important next generation event, as we come together not just as a Chicago community, but a national one.
We're Kylie and Ben Bass from New York City, representing the Northeast region.
We are so excited to be chairing this event because it's a great way to show the power and depth of our Next Gen boards from around the country.
I'm Stacy Petito Nowak from Weston, Florida, representing the Southeast region. It's an honor to co-chair this event. I know that the eyewitness generation will not be here indefinitely. It's up to me and the people of my generation to step up and make a difference and to continue telling the survivor stories well into the future.
We are Jennifer
and Richard DeVinci
from Los Angeles, California, and we're representing the Western region.
As a grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, being involved in Next Gen outreach is particularly meaningful to me. With so much happening in the world today, the museum's work has never been more important.
My name is Alex Brill, and along with my wife, Joanna, we're honored to be serving as Mid-Atlantic Regional co-chairs to tonight's event. As the son of a Holocaust survivor, this history is an important part of my life and led to my involvement with the museum. It's our responsibility to ensure, through our involvement and through our support, that the museum is here for this generation and for all generations to come.
We are proud to be representing this community, but even more so to be standing shoulder to shoulder with so many dedicated leaders from around the country. The Washington Next Generation Board first came together nearly 15 years ago in a shared desire to support the museum and make the words "never again" a reality. We are dedicated to confronting today's moral challenges and to shaping the next generation of leaders through our outreach and programming. This includes a day at the museum for families, an annual gala, and perhaps our most inspiring event, an evening to honor Holocaust survivors. Over the past 15 months, though the museum doors have been closed, its virtual doors have opened wider than ever before.
The New York Next Generation community was the museum's first group to bring together young professionals. Our members share an interest in making Holocaust history relevant today, especially as the eyewitness generation grows smaller. The group began in 2005 as a way to connect like-minded New Yorkers in their 20s, 30s, and 40s to the museum's work, and over the years has expanded around the country. We bring the museum to the New York community through an annual gala, programs for young families, and more casual events like Mets games and bowling nights.
Chicago's Next Generation Board and community has been active for more than 10 years, bringing hundreds of young people together to hear museum speakers, traveling together to DC on national Next Generation missions, and raising significant funds from our peers.
For the last 6 years, I've had the privilege of being involved in the Southeast region's thriving South Florida Business Professional Advisory Committee, whose goal is to support the museum's impact as a world-class institution. Since joining this group, I've seen it grow from a few dozen people to more than 100 dedicated community members. And how exciting it is that this evening, through the power of the virtual experience, participants from all 9 states of the museum's Southeast region are able to join with others across the nation to support the critical work of the museum.
We are thrilled to serve as co-chairs in this first ever Next Gen program for the 10 states that comprise the Western region. When it is safe to do so, we will kick off our efforts to engage and inspire young professionals and emerging philanthropists in the critical mission and educational work of the museum.
While COVID may have put each region's in-person Next Gen events on hold,
the silver lining of this year's event is being able to connect with our fellow board members and come together for a really impactful program that we're excited to share with everyone tonight.
we will all certainly be inspired by Holocaust survivor Irene Weiss and social activist Rachel Brown as we learn how they are each committed to transforming hate to hope during this time of rising hatred and anti-Semitism. Thank you for joining us.
It's the morning of January 7th. I reached for my phone and began scrolling through my Twitter feed, looking for any coverage I could find about the riots. I find myself staring at a picture of a man who had broken into the Capitol. The front of his hoodie reads, Camp Auschwitz. Staff is printed on the back. I hope my grandmother doesn't see this, I think. My grandmother was 13 years old when her family was pushed into a gas chamber. She was pushed in another direction. She was a slave laborer in Auschwitz for 8 months, working near the gas chamber, sorting through the belongings of her family and other Jews. I grew up hearing stories of how she and her family were taken to Auschwitz, yet I still fail to grasp that they were truly my own relatives. Every attempt to understand what she went through seems to push the reality of it even further away. But when I saw that man in the hoodie standing inside the Capitol, something changed for me. I felt as if the evil that loomed so large in my family's history broke into my home and was on display for everyone to see. My grandmother speaks regularly to high school and college students and to groups at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. She will rarely turn down speaking engagements. Depending on the audience, small details are left out or kept in, but the overarching narrative remains the same, and so do the lessons she leaves with the listener. We must remember what people are capable of in order to make sure that what happened to her never happens again. My grandmother did end up seeing the image of the man wearing that hoodie, and she also witnessed the mob break into the building that symbolizes the heart of democracy in this country. As wrenching as these scenes have been for those of us who grew up in America, I can only imagine the memories this conjure up for her. My grandmother tells me that her sense of security and peace of mind have been shaken. She will go on speaking, bringing us the terrible lessons of the past. It's up to us to meet the challenge of the present. My name is Ben Gorvine, and now it is my honor to introduce to you my grandmother, Irene Weiss.
Thank you. So the day this photo was taken, I was 13 years old. It was in May of 1944 when we arrived in Auschwitz, and we were urged to get out very fast and leave everything behind. If women were holding children, he would wave them before they even came up to him, because what apparently happened here, that the women and children were designated for the gas chamber. My mother was sent off with 2 little boys to one side, my 17-year-old sister to another direction, and I was left with a younger sister holding her hand, and the stick came down between us, and she was sent where my mother went, and I was sent towards the young adults. It was my first enormous trauma. I was totally shaken by this first tearing apart of our family. After liberation, I moved to New York. The important thing was to get out of Europe. Things we heard from people who left to the US before us never mentioned anti-Semitism, and I didn't find any anti-Semitism when I arrived, but I found a sense of freedom, and that was very, very important. The Capitol became an important symbol of our freedom. The museum, yearly commemoration took place in the rotunda, which was a very moving experience with a color guard and important speakers in this very special place. And all of a sudden it was desecrated by people who had Nazi symbols on their shirts. An attack on this building was happening in this country was unthinkable. I was frightened. I thought that history is repeating itself. I thought that I have to think about the possibility that this will escalate and that I will not be safe and my family will not be safe, and that perhaps we should plan, unlike what my parents did, who did not do any planning. I thought that it would be foolish not to have learned from the past, but I was very serious about thinking of sitting down and planning how to approach this new threat. When I was in Auschwitz, I thought if we ever survive, then we come out of there and we will tell the world what happened to cruelty and the genocide and the killing, that there will never be any discrimination and anti-Semitism. I thought at the time that nobody knew about what was going on in Auschwitz. And all we have to do is tell people. But actually, everybody did know about it and didn't do anything about it. But to have some of this anti-Semitism and denial surface now, 75 years later, it means that nothing was learned. Genocide continues today in many parts of the world. This institution is dedicated to understand how genocide happens, how to prevent it, and how to educate the public. How it builds and how it happens is important to understand. The lies are the most effective aspect of hate speech, and we must not allow the lies to take hold. All kinds of speech is allowed in this country, free speech, but not the kind that leads to hurting other people, not the kind that ends with discrimination. So our young people have to defend their right to speak out against lies and hate speech. Anytime it appears, it has to be stopped in its track. Genocide did not begin with killing, it began with words.
A huge thank you to you, Irene, for sharing your personal and your powerful story and your insights. I'm Peter Alexander, the Chief White House Correspondent and co-anchor of Weekend Today at NBC News, and we have a very special guest who is joining us for this conversation. She is a former museum fellow and the executive director and founder of Over Zero, Rachel Brown. Rachel, so nice to be with you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Likewise, and I'm very grateful to be here for this conversation.
This is a powerful and important conversation I want to have with you. So let's try to wind our way through this if we can for a little bit. Your expertise, your work focuses on communication and conflict and really the intersection of those two things. Can you tell us about what your mission is, what you try to do, and how you got to this place?
Absolutely. And I just want to talk about communication to start with. And I think I've always been drawn to communication. It's the stories we tell. It's how we make sense of the world around us. It's how we make sense and understand the meaning of different events, of what's expected of us, of where we belong. And what that means is that communication is this incredible tool. It's also the only way we collaborate and do anything together as human beings. But because violence, because genocides, mass atrocities are things that are done by groups of people, it also means that anywhere that we see violence between groups, anywhere that we see groups of people being targeted with violence, we see this powerful tool of communication being used as a weapon. And really my work for the last 10 years has been to understand how that happens, how we can recognize it early on, and how we can leverage the power of communication to prevent violence rather than to lead us towards it.
So for you, this began after the election in 2007 in Kenya, where you went to Kenya to try to diffuse that atmosphere of violence and hate that followed that election. Then more than 1,000 Kenyans lost their lives. And a lot of it was instigated, was amplified by the use of cell phones that were just then finding their way to the hands of so many Kenyan people. What did you experience there, and how did you see, as you indicate, that technology become a weapon?
So I ended up living and working in Kenya from 2010 to 2014. And I worked there with a lot of local activists. And what they described to me that they had experienced in 2007, 2008, around the election cycle and the post-election violence, is that they had seen cell phones be weaponized. They had seen this technology, and I'm talking basic cell phones. All you can do is really text message or call someone. But this lets you share information from a city to a rural area. It lets that information travel quickly. It lets you forward it. People were forwarding text messages to all of their different contacts. And that was used to spread fear, to spread rumors. What we hear being talked about nowadays is mis and disinformation. This is what's going to happen if that group wins. This is what they'll do to us. It told people to arm themselves, and was used to help people coordinate and mobilize for violence and put a lot of social pressure. And these local peace activists found themselves sort of caught off guard. How could they push back against that sort of speed and tide of communication that was pulling towards violence? And I ended up staying there and working with these local activists to figure out how could we use that same technology, cell phones, and use it to better organize and coordinate communities to push back on fear, on rumors, and on incitement, and instead start to address some of the root causes of conflict.
So talk about how you did that, right? Because the only way to sort of stop that cycle of violence is to disrupt it, is to blunt it. And in some ways it's to combat it with, as you say, not disinformation or misinformation, but with fact and with a message that's more peaceful in what you're communicating.
So one of the starting insights that the team that I worked with had was just how fast fear spread. That once there was a rumor of the variety that said, they're coming to get us, protect your children, protect your neighbors, that spreads fast. So the first question was, how do we get ahead of that curve? We built a platform and did door-to-door outreach through local influencers, faith leaders, youth leaders, to get people to subscribe to a cell phone service, which meant that in a given community, in a neighborhood, we might have 5,000 people subscribed on this platform. And what that let us do was monitor what was happening in real time and have that communication response where we find out a rumor is reaching a couple hundred people, we were able to reach 5,000 people and start to spread correct information. And once we had that platform to reach 5,000 people in a neighborhood, we ended up with 65,000 people in 20 hotspots around the country. We were able to proactively give people correct information. We were able to invite people to local events and forums, and we were able to monitor and respond to tension.
Is there a difference, Rachel, between dangerous speech and hate speech?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of definitions that people might use of hate speech, but usually it connotes a sort of intention. I feel hateful, and I'm saying something that's mean or harmful to someone. The challenge is that when we look at the type of speech that's actually dangerous, the types of patterns of speech that we see over and over again throughout history and across the world, the patterns of speech and stories and ideas that we see spreading through societies before and during mass atrocities, that speech doesn't only include hate speech. It's actually a much bigger category. It includes threat speech, anything that portrays an entire group of people as some sort of a threat or as guilty. It also includes really putting social pressure, targeting members of the group that's being mobilized who aren't buying in to those narratives to say, you're not really one of us if you're not willing to target that other group and see us as a threat. So it includes a much broader spectrum of speech than just what's hateful. Because if you think about it, creating a narrative that says, we need violence to protect ourselves, to protect the vulnerable amongst us. This is a really powerful narrative that mobilizes people, but it's often cloaked in a way that looks like empathy. Don't you want to protect women and children? Don't you want to protect our group? And so a lot of the speech that's most dangerous isn't necessarily hateful.
I think for anybody who's listening to this conversation, what took place during your experiences in Kenya seems so reflective of a lot of the conversations we're having right now in our own country. Now just 5 months, not even removed from the insurrection, obviously, and just broadly how social media and text messages, what have you, is now too often used in this same way in this country. So I want to ask you about that in a bit as well, but I do want to ask you about the guide that you helped create and how the museum helped influence this. It's called Diffusing Hate, a Strategic Communication Guide to Counteract Dangerous Speech. Clearly this was motivated by your experiences in Kenya, but what lessons do you think we can learn from that, and which ones could sort of apply to our experiences now?
Thanks for asking that. And really writing the guide and the time with the museum gave me the opportunity to reflect on the time I'd spent in Kenya, to look at other case studies from around the world where we'd seen a rise in dangerous speech and we'd seen people push back in different ways. And it also gave me the opportunity to talk to academics and scientists and people who study our brains and our psychology and marketing and say, what do they know about how communication influences us? And there are some really strong strands that we see throughout that I think are relevant in any context. One of them is that dangerous speech, hate speech, it's often very loud. And one of its impacts, it's not just to target, it's not just against its targets, it's also that it silences people. People start to say, it's too messy, it's too hard to raise my voice, I'm not going to say anything. Or if I say something and speak out against this, then maybe I'm going to become the target of an attack. And so the way that this type of speech has its influence is not just through the loud voices that are promoting it. It's not just through those who participate in violence. It's through the disengagement and the silencing. I think the biggest lesson learned is when we see those seeds being planted, it's our job to speak up and to do so loudly.
So I sort of want to hone in on that a little bit, because I think a lot of us who hear this, me included, you do feel some responsibility, some obligation. Like, where do I find myself in this conversation? What more can I do? We all are looking for that sort of sense of empowerment, while at the same time acknowledging sometimes the easier path, as we've learned, that can be dangerous in its own way, but the easier path is that sort of silence or just sort of disappearing into the backdrop.
For the starting point of an individual, the first thing is to take stock of who am I and where do I sit in my own social network and in my society? And what are my unique gifts and talents that I'm bringing to the world every day? You're a reporter, right? You're shaping how we understand events. You're probably very directly connected. One of the people that really inspired me in Kenya was an artist. He was a sign maker and a graffiti artist, and went out during the post-election violence in his neighborhood and started painting "Peace Wanted Alive," "Keep Peace Alive," and tagging it with his name. And he was a respected messenger, respected by the group of people that was being mobilized as perpetrators in his neighborhood. And he found a way to figure out what was his platform that he had and to use it to work against violence. And so I think all of us can ask, who listens to me? Who respects me as a messenger for them? And who's looking to me for advice or guidance or to help them make sense of the world? Who might be willing to listen to me that I see maybe starting to buy into some of these narratives? What platforms do I have? Am I a lay leader in my faith community? Am I, on my local PTA and other parents are listening to me and there might be something we can do in our school? So thinking about where you have levers of influence and how you can engage through that.
It seems to me, I'm not the expert on this, but even just like in your daily interactions, right? When you're on the sidelines at one of your kids' softball games or soccer games, and you just hear a conversation that's just like makes you a little bit uncomfortable, sometimes just inserting yourself, right? And just sort of acknowledging who you are. And there's a different perspective that needs to be considered. It doesn't need to be combative. It just needs to not allow, as you say, those feelings of hate or that dangerous speech to just sort of run uninterrupted. And obviously all of this relates back to the museum and its mission. And I'm just interested for your view. We all ask the question of what we may have done were we there then, about how their mission relates to what you're experiencing now.
Absolutely. And I mean, that question, what would we have done if we had been there then? And I think that my perspective is that we can't know. All of us have it in us to be the person who rescues their neighbor and to be a guard and to be a perpetrator. We all have that. That's part of our human capacity. And so I think what the museum lets us do is to reflect and become self-aware and to start to ask ourselves, what would I wish that I would do, right? If I look back, which of these roles do I hope that I would play? And then how does that line up to my life right now? What am I seeing in the world? What would it take for me to lean into that? So I think that the value of history and reflecting on the lessons of history is what we can learn about our own human capabilities for harm and for good, and how it lets us sort of build a goal for ourselves or a path that we want to take. I want to be the person that stands up and raises my voice and doesn't go silent. So what does that mean? What do I need to pay attention to in the world around me?
What impact did your work with the museum have on the stories you now share and the work that you now do?
I mean, my work with the museum and with the Center for Prevention of Genocide at the museum, which looks at what's going on in today's world, both gave me access to the research and the work that they were doing, looking at genocide today and where we're seeing risks and how to learn from it. But it also meant that through the course of my fellowship and in writing the guide and doing the research for it, I got the chance to take a break in my day and go into the museum and spend time with the exhibits and really ground myself in that history and in the lessons from it. And one that had such a huge impact on me was an exhibit called Some Were Neighbors. And it looked at all the different roles. And I think this is something so important. We can look at history and we can say, wow, there was this group of people that did these terrible things and these terrible things happened. We have to remember that that happens in a whole society. Violence like this is a whole of society problem. It's not just about the perpetration, the people directly perpetrating the violence. It is about the silence and the enabling. And that can be harder to understand and wrap our heads around. And I think that for me was really important to think, what are all the roles that people play that can enable a society to move towards genocide? But what are all the roles then that people could play to stand up and move it in a different direction?
And as you talk about your experiences at the museum, how did the Nazis during the war use what we now call hate speech to turn average Germans and others against Jews then?
Yeah. It's such a big question. The answer is that they absolutely did. And you can see that in those patterns that I was talking about. There was dehumanization, comparisons of Jews to vermin, to pests. There was narratives that scapegoated, that portrayed Jewish people as guilty, and other groups as guilty of bringing in disease, as contaminated.
Just as they didn't have social media like we have today, nor cell phones to text, but they did have other means to communicate this message for it to grow like, just.
And they had a very new medium. There was a medium that was very new at the time, film. And these narratives not only denigrated Jews, they also brought together people. They built a very rigid boundary around who was the us that needed protection from these external threats. And they built the social pressure around it, right? They used clubs for kids. They used this medium of film to make people feel these emotions and to sort of tap into these powerful emotions and make people feel like they were acting not as individuals, but as part of something bigger and to protect their own group. And so we see both of those pieces of it. And what's interesting too is that where we see changes in communication technologies, we see changes in how communication is weaponized for violence. And actually, during the Holocaust, we did see film being used in this really new way, the same way that later I saw text messages being used in Kenya, and that now we see social media contributing to these dynamics.
The museum's motto, as you know well, is what you do matters. How important, we've talked about this, but how important is individual responsibility?
I think it's hugely important. And I think it's one of the values of what history teaches us. Individual responsibility, we all have choice. And one of the things that dangerous speech often does is it actually tries to make us think that we don't. One of the key patterns that we see is this idea that we have no other choice but violence. That other group is so threatening. We have such a strong need to protect ourselves. We don't want to be violent, but it's the only choice we have. And I think the thing we have to remember is we always have choice. And where we see communities that have come together to resist violence, we've seen that the actions of leaders, not just formal leaders, but lay leaders, people that play some sort of influential role in their community matters, and that it matters what you do as an individual. It also, we have a lot easier time acting as part of a group than we do alone. So what we do as individual matters. And one of the things we can also do is start conversations now, make sure that we have partners, friends, collaborators that we can work with, that we know also care about these issues, that we're having these discussions in the groups that we're part of, so that we're setting the social norms within our own communities.
So let me run through a couple of the thoughts. What worries you most now?
It's a big question, and I have a long list of worries. I think in this country, what worries me most now is the real shift in our public discourse that we've witnessed, and the risks that come with it. And I think some of the silence that we've seen come with it. And of course, it gives me hope to see how many different people across political lines, across different lines, have stood up in response to some of the violence that we have seen, to say that this is not okay, and that we want something different. I think at the global level, we are seeing this speech emerge in different places. And I think it concerns me greatly to see that happening. And I think in this country, we have to remember that the norms that we set are also important around the world, that when we engage in this type of rhetoric in our politics, we lose credibility to talk about it elsewhere. I guess this is a rambling answer. A lot of things do worry me, but
so that's what worries you. So we want to be positive here too. What inspires you? What motivates and inspires you right now?
You know, in my work right now with Over Zero and building off of the guide with the museum and all of that work, I work with leaders from all different sectors and from around the world. I work with civil society leaders, business leaders, faith leaders, people from across the political spectrum. And I see them as they recognize some of these patterns of speech and some of these risks, being willing to do something about it. And I see them engaging and starting to see it as their responsibility. And I think that gives me hope, because the truth is this is a human-made problem. And so the solution is also human-made, and it is about our choices and our decisions. So when I see people in different, using their own influence, their own platforms to do something about it, it really inspires me.
I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, right? The same way that this is a human-made problem, the only solution can be made by humans as well, which is why it's the responsibility of all of us who participate in this conversation and those throughout the community who we impact and with whom we interact to really sort of make that difference and be the disruptors so that hate and dangerous speech doesn't continue to sort of spread so rapidly and so dangerously. Rachel, this has been my pleasure to talk to you. What a great conversation, and the difference you're making is inspiring for each of us and also really having a real impact on our lives. So thank you very much for being a part of today's conversation.
Thank you so much.
And now welcome Museum Director Sarah Bloomfield.
Thank you, Peter and Rachel, and special thanks to Irene and Ben. Your remarks have very special meaning in these troubled times as we witness continued Holocaust distortion and an alarming spike in anti-Semitic incidents. The volatile world around us is an ongoing reminder of just how relevant and urgent our work is. You know, I joined the project to build the museum almost exactly 35 years ago now. And at that time, we worried then, would anyone come? Would non-Jews come? It turned out that millions came and millions of non-Jews came. 93% of our visitation is non-Jewish. And we have more and more demand for our work every year. As anti-Semitism rises, young people need to know of its long history, which long predated the Holocaust and made it possible. Holocaust history is uniquely powerful in teaching one of the most important lessons of our times, the dangers of unchecked hatred. On a final note, I just wanted to add that I hope you value your engagement with the museum just as much as we value it. Every day I deal with many things, but there's always only one thing truly top of mind, and that's the long-term future of the museum. Knowing we have wonderful friends and supporters like you gives me great reassurance that our future will be in good hands. Thank you very much.
You as the next generation are so critically important to ensuring that we can do our work.
The challenges that we are meeting in the Middle East are huge. The museum is one of the very few institutions that decided to take up to those challenges.
The support of the next generation is critical because we're going to be soon entering a future where there will be no Holocaust survivors.
As the child of a survivor, it means so much to know that we are here to carry the baton from generation to generation.
Your support helps us honor both the survivors and victims of the Holocaust and those facing contemporary atrocities.
For this, we're very grateful, and we look forward to working with you for generations to come.
Hi, I'm Cooper Wellman.
And I'm Stephen Noble, and we're representing the museum's Midwest Teen Committee. It's so important that my generation and the generation before me carries on the torch of educating.
I think that we really need to learn and safeguard that the genocide doesn't occur again.
Education is the first step to building a better tomorrow and a better future.
In 10th grade, I read Elie Wiesel's Night. I was never the same. I wanted the world to know the Holocaust happened. When Elie Wiesel passed in 2016, I knew then that the responsibility had been passed to my generation.
This cause is deeply personal to me. In 1937, my grandmother fled Poland. Her mother's entire side of the family died in the Holocaust. My grandmother knew how lucky she was and believed deeply in the museum's mission. She hosted one of the first parlor meetings, even before the museum stood on the National Mall.
We are involved in the museum because it has a critical moral voice that has never been more important. My grandparents and their generation were instrumental in supporting the museum in the early years, and Katie and I are proud to continue their legacy and ensure that we share the lessons with our friends and our children.
The museum matters because it offers a platform to educate the world on the importance of remembering the Holocaust while serving as a loud voice in the fight for social and racial issues.
The sad truth is that there still is too much hatred, too much genocide, too much anti-Semitism, and way too many mass killings.
Remembering is not enough.
We need to act.
Next Gen is a critical long-term play for the museum because we are the generation that will expand the museum's resources in the decades to come. Engaging our generation in philanthropy now will strengthen our bonds to this cause for the future.
In today's world, with rampant anti-Semitism, both here and abroad, rising Holocaust denial, and violence and genocide in too many corners of the world, this museum has never been more relevant, and we must all continue to support it. With fewer survivors by our side, it is increasingly up to us to carry the torch forward as we seek to confront hatred, prevent genocide, and promote human dignity worldwide.
Many of you have already made a generous gift. Now, we are asking you to join us in making an additional contribution or a new donation. There is a QR code on your screen. Please take out your phones, open your cameras, and take a picture to make your donation. Or go to the museum's website now to make it online. Every gift matters.
It's up to us to meet the challenge of the present.
Please give what you are able.
We hope you give today.
And please give generously.
Thank you.
What you do matters.
On behalf of the Western region, thank you to the Next Generation community.
On behalf of the Southeast region, thank you to the entire Next Gen community.
On behalf of the Mid-Atlantic region, thank you.
On behalf of the museum's Northeast office, I want to thank the entire Next Generation community.
On behalf of the Midwest region, thank you for being part of the museum's future.
Without you, our important work would not be possible.
You have voluntarily taken on a sacred responsibility to keep the memory of the Holocaust and the stories of our cherished Holocaust survivors alive for years to come.
Your passion and dedication inspires us every single day.
Thank you for ensuring that the museum's mission continues for many generations in the future.
Thank you for your deep belief in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and ensuring that the museum's legacy lives on indefinitely.
To my grandmother,
to Irene and all of the survivors.
We pledge to keep your stories alive.
We pledge to never forget.
We will remember.